for the first 20 seconds. They said the bull was a problem no one could keep, a number on a sheet to be moved and forgotten. One tiny typo in an address code changed his route. Instead of a quiet sanctuary, a winter road carried him toward a small ranch that had never asked for him, and that was where everything began. Snow lay thin over the gravel when the truck rolled up the lane. Silas stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, trying to guess why a long trailer would come this far from the highway. The driver climbed down with a clipboard and said, "Delivery for AK 907-2487. Silas nodded at the numbers, slow and careful. "That's my code, but I didn't order livestock." The driver shrugged like the decision was already made. "One white bull, 4 years old. Been on the road a long time. I need to unload." Buck, the old hand who helped through winter, came from the shed and whispered, "You sure this is ours?" Silas kept his voice steady. "Let's look at the papers first." The paperwork listed a donor facility in Texas and a receiving place in Anchorage Silas had never heard of. The driver tapped the line with his pen. "Look here, Talkeetna." The spelling was close but not quite right. Buck pointed at the code again. "If it's wrong, you'll take him back?" The driver glanced at the sky and said, "I'll miss the ferry if I turn around. You can call the office. I'll leave the folder." Silas studied the quiet road and the thin light. He didn't like arguing on a frozen afternoon with a tired man and an animal in a box. "All right," he said. "North pasture. We'll hold him a day and sort this." The driver opened the ramp. The bull stepped down slow, head high, breath soft like steam, calm in the cold. Silas noticed how he paused to take in the open space, how his eyes moved from fence to trees to the far ridge, as if he measured the land in his own way. Buck whispered, "He's bigger than the stories people tell." Silas said, "Let's give him hay and water, then make calls." The driver slid the clipboard across. "Sign here." Silas signed, and the trailer pulled away, taillights fading in the gray. The pasture felt newly awake. The bull stood by the spruce line, watching the mountains as if he had always known them, and Silas could not shake the feeling that the numbers on that paper were not wrong at all. They were a door. The next morning, the snow had turned to crust under a pale sun. Silas stood by the kitchen window, staring at the bull in the far pasture. The animal hadn't moved much through the night. He was still there, head low, breathing clouds into the frozen air. Something about the stillness unsettled Silas. He told Buck, "Call the transport company first thing. I don't want to keep him longer than needed." Buck nodded, pouring coffee. "You think he's dangerous?" Silas thought for a moment. "I think he's tired. But tired things can still break fences." By noon they'd left 2 voicemails, one to the shipper in Texas and one to the transport company, but no reply came. The Thanksgiving holiday had shut most offices down. "We'll have to wait till Monday," Buck said. Silas sighed. "Fine. Let's keep him fed." They loaded hay into the back of the truck and drove out to the north pasture. The bull watched them come. His eyes were sharp, not the dull stare of barn animals. He stepped closer, slow and measured. Buck whispered, "He's studying us." Silas threw the hay over the fence. "Maybe he's deciding if we're worth the trouble." That evening, while the wind picked up, Silas went out again with a flashlight. The bull stood near the fence looking west toward the dark line of mountains. The beam of light caught his breath, a steady rhythm, calm and deep. "You're not what I expected," Silas said softly. The bull flicked an ear but didn't move. He just kept watching the horizon like something out there belonged to him. When Silas came back inside, his daughter Nessa had arrived home from college. "Dad, there's a bull in our pasture?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "Some mistake with delivery papers," he said. "We'll sort it next week." She frowned. "He's not acting like a farm bull. Did you see how he surveys the field?" "You mean he's not just standing there?" Silas smiled. "No," she said, serious now. "He's exploring. He's learning his boundaries." That night, Nessa watched from the porch while the bull paced the fence line, tracing the edge of his new world. "Maybe," she said quietly, "he's not angry. Maybe he's just thinking." Silas didn't answer. He only listened to the low hum of the wind and the soft crunch of hooves in snow, wondering what kind of creature he'd agreed to keep, and what kind of story had just begun. By Friday the call still hadn't been returned. The phone line kept going to voicemail, and the messages Silas left grew shorter each time. "Still got your bull," he'd say, "need instructions." But no one called back. Out in the pasture the bull seemed to be settling in. He wasn't pacing like the first day. He spent long stretches near the south fence, where the land sloped toward the river, breathing in the mist. Buck drove out each morning with hay, keeping a careful distance. He doesn't charge, Buck told Silas, just watches. Like he's making sure I do it right. Saturday morning, Silas carried a bucket of water himself. The air was sharp enough to sting. When he poured the water into the trough, the bull walked closer than before, close enough that Silas could see the small scar on his nose, the faded brand on his flank, the twitch of his ears. "You're not much of a monster, are you?" Silas said quietly. The bull snorted, steam curling up from his nostrils. He didn't step back. He just stood there, calm, present. For a long moment, it felt less like man and beast, and more like two strangers trying to guess what the other wanted. That afternoon, the weather broke. Snow started falling sideways, thick and fast. Silas and Buck worked to close the barn doors and reinforce the wire fence. The wind howled across the pasture, and they could barely see the animal through the white haze. "He'll freeze out there," Nessa shouted from the porch. "We can't bring him in," Silas called back. "He's too big for the stalls." They left the gate to the shed open, hoping instinct would guide him. By nightfall, the storm had swallowed everything. At dawn, the land lay buried under white silence. Silas trudged through knee-deep snow to check the pasture. He stopped halfway, stunned. The bull was standing inside the open shed, warm breath fogging the cold air, his massive head turned toward the light. He'd found shelter on his own. "Smart boy," Silas muttered, almost smiling. Buck arrived behind him, panting. "That fence didn't even bend," he said. "You see? He could have torn the place apart. But he didn't." Silas looked at the bull again and felt a small chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The papers had called him dangerous, impossible, unmanageable. But the creature before him looked peaceful, almost grateful. And deep down, Silas wondered if the mistake that brought him here was really a mistake at all. Sunday morning came quiet and bright, the snow glittering like crushed glass across the pasture. Nessa bundled herself in a coat and scarf, her camera swinging from her neck. "I'm documenting him for my wildlife class," she told her father, stepping out before he could argue. Silas followed with a mug of coffee, boots crunching in the frost. The bull stood near the ridge, the sunlight turning his white coat almost silver. He didn't flinch when they came closer. He only lifted his head slightly as if to acknowledge their presence. "He doesn't act like any farm animal I've seen," Nessa said. "He's alert but not scared. Look at his breathing, steady. Look at how he moves, he's scanning the land, not pacing." Silas squinted. "He's still a big risk, Nessa. Don't get too close." She lowered the camera, half smiling. "He's not a risk, he's thinking. Maybe for the first time in his life, he's got space to think." Later that day, Buck came running from the barn. "Boss, we've got a problem, north fence line's down." They jumped into the truck and raced to the edge of the property. A pine tree had snapped under snow, crushing the wire. Silas's gut tightened. If he sees that gap. But before he could finish, the bull was already there, standing a few feet from the opening. His breath smoked in the cold. For a long moment he looked at the hole in the fence, then at the mountains beyond. Silas whispered, "Go on, boy, no one's stopping you." The bull didn't move. He stood there, calm, deliberate, then turned around and walked back toward the pasture. Buck exhaled. "He chose to stay," he said in disbelief. Nessa raised her camera. "That's not instinct," she murmured. "That's a decision." That night, Silas sat by the window watching the bull's silhouette near the spruce trees. "You think he knows he's not supposed to be here?" he asked softly. Nessa didn't look up from her notebook. "I think he knows he finally is where he's supposed to be." Silas didn't reply. But when the bull turned his head toward the window, as if sensing the man's gaze, the thought struck him hard. Maybe the creature wasn't the one lost in the wrong place. Maybe the rest of them were. By Monday, the world outside was glassy and still. Frost smoked off the fence wires in the first pale light. Silas finally got a call through to the transport company. A woman named Margot answered, sounding nervous the moment he gave his name. "Mr. Crow? Oh my, there's been a serious error. That bull was supposed to go to a sanctuary outside Anchorage, not to you." Silas gripped the phone tighter. "So you sent me the wrong animal?" "I'm afraid so," Margot said. "It was a digit mix-up on the facility code. The bull's name is Nabid, 4 years old, breeding stock from Texas. He's been considered dangerous. We'll arrange pickup as soon as possible." Silas looked out at the pasture. Nabid was standing calmly near the water trough, a crow perched on his back. "Dangerous, huh?" he muttered. Then into the phone, "You sure you've got the right bull? Because this one's been calm since the day he got here." Margot hesitated. "Mr. Crow, his record says otherwise." 3 handlers injured. Multiple attacks. He's unpredictable. Then your record's wrong, Silas said. He's fine here. Quiet. Eats, walks, sleeps, watches the mountains. Maybe he just doesn't like being locked up. There was a long pause. Then Margot's tone softened. That would match what the behaviorist said. But legally, I can't leave him there permanently. I'll need you to keep him until the sanctuary reopens. They're under quarantine for a respiratory outbreak. About 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Silas repeated. All right. Send whatever papers you need me to sign. He can stay. When he hung up, Nessa was leaning in the doorway. They're taking him back? Not yet, Silas said. He's ours till Christmas. She smiled faintly. Maybe he'll like it here. That afternoon, as Buck scattered hay, he pointed toward the bull. You notice how he circles the field every morning? Same pattern. Checks every fence post, then heads for that southwest corner. Routine, Silas said. Means he feels safe enough to have one. As the day dimmed, Nabid stood again near the spruce trees, the wind tugging his coat. Silas watched him from the fence line and whispered, Guess you're not going anywhere after all. The bull turned slightly, slow and steady as if he'd heard, and for the first time Silas thought he saw peace in that massive, watchful face. The days that followed slipped quietly into a rhythm. Each morning, Nabid walked the fence line in the same slow circuit, his hooves crunching softly in the frost. He would pause at the far corner near the slope, face the mountains and stand still for long minutes, breathing in the cold air like it meant something to him. Silas began to time his coffee by that walk, leaning on the porch rail to watch it unfold. It felt less like observation and more like conversation, though neither of them spoke. Nessa started recording the bull's behavior for her coursework. See this, she told her father, showing a video on her phone. He's created zones, feeding area, resting area, lookout point. That's environmental mapping. It means he's adapting. Silas watched the clip. You talk about him like a scientist, he said. I have to, she answered, smiling. Otherwise I'd start talking about him like a friend. That evening a pickup rolled down the lane. The driver was a woman in a heavy coat with a stethoscope slung around her neck. Dr. Rowan Pike, she said, shaking Silas's hand. Margot sent me to check your visitor. She moved carefully toward the fence, studying Nabid through binoculars. Good posture, alert eyes, no sign of agitation, she murmured. He looks healthy. Silas nodded. Not what you expected? Rowan lowered the binoculars. Frankly, no. I read the Texas report. They called him unpredictable and dangerous. She watched Nabid graze a moment longer. But look at his muscle tone, no tension, no defensive behavior. He's not dangerous. He's intelligent, and that intelligence was punished by confinement. Nessa joined them, notebook in hand. So the problem wasn't him, she said. Rowan nodded. It rarely is. Stress doesn't just break behavior, it rewrites it. As the three of them stood there, Nabid turned his head toward them. The setting sun caught the curve of his horns and the steady gleam in his eyes. For a long breath, no one moved. Then he lowered his head and went back to grazing, as calm as the snow that began to fall again. Rowan exhaled slowly. Mr. Crow, she said, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You've given that bull something he's never had before, peace. Silas looked out over the pasture. I didn't give him peace, he said quietly. I just gave him space. The peace I think was already his. 3 days later, the phone rang just after dawn. Silas answered half asleep, expecting Margot again, but it wasn't her. Mr. Crow? The voice on the other end was deep, tired, and cautious. This is Holden Whitmore. I'm the owner of Whitmore Champion Genetics, the facility that bred Nabid. Silas straightened in his chair. You're the one who wanted him gone. I'm the one who tried everything first, Holden replied. I heard from Margot that the bull's been living with you for over a week, with no incidents. None, Silas said. He eats, walks, sleeps, and minds his business. That's not possible, Holden said sharply. We've got 2 years of data. 4 handlers hurt. Reinforced pens destroyed. He's a liability. Silas walked to the window, watching Nabid move through the light snow. Maybe he just didn't like the box you built around him, he said. He's calm here. Maybe the problem wasn't the bull, it was the walls. Holden was silent for a moment. Then, more quietly, how much space does he have? 40 acres, Silas said. Fewer people, fewer rules. Holden exhaled through the line. We kept him in a 12x16 pen. Standard for breeding stock. 12 feet, Silas repeated, shaking his head. That's a closet, not a pasture. Nessa came into the room mouthing, "Who is it?" Silas covered the receiver. "His old owner," he whispered. Then back into the phone, "You're welcome to see for yourself." "I might take you up on that," Holden said, though it sounded like he didn't believe it. "But until then, keep him contained. He's worth more than any ranch out there." Silas smiled faintly. "He's not worth more. He's worth something different." That afternoon, Nessa recorded Nabid again. She filmed how he watched a moose and calf on the ridge. No fear, no anger, just quiet interest. "He's interacting with the world," she said. "That's what healthy looks like." That night, the sky turned violet with cold, and Silas sat on the porch beside Buck. The bull stood in his favorite spot, looking toward Denali. "He remembers," Silas murmured. "What it felt like to be caged." Buck nodded. "Maybe that's why he don't leave the fence. Maybe freedom means more when you remember the walls." Silas said nothing. But deep down he knew the real test hadn't come yet, and that call from Texas was only the beginning. A week later, on a gray morning with low clouds crawling over the ridge, a white pickup turned into the driveway. Silas stepped out before the engine even stopped. The man climbing down looked out of place in the Alaskan cold, clean boots, pressed jacket, cautious eyes. "Holden Whitmore," he said, extending a gloved hand. "I wanted to see him with my own eyes." Silas nodded once. "He's out back. You can watch from the fence." They walked together in silence across the frozen ground, their breath forming short ghosts in the air. When they reached the pasture, Nabid was near the spruce line, his breath steaming, tail flicking lazily. The bull raised his head at the sound of boots on snow. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he took one slow step forward, nostrils flaring. His muscles tightened, not in rage but in memory. "He remembers you," Silas said. Holden's jaw flexed. "He remembers what I represented: confinement, noise, fear." Nessa joined them quietly, her camera ready but unused. Nobody spoke. Nabid stood 10 yards away, still and alert, eyes locked on the man from his past. A bird cried high above the trees, then even that sound faded. Finally, Holden whispered, "In Texas he'd have charged by now." Silas nodded. "Because in Texas he had nowhere else to go. Here he's got choices." Rowan arrived from her truck, holding a folder of reports. "Mr. Whitmore," she greeted, handing him the papers. "You should see this." Holden opened the pages: stress hormone levels, weight gain, behavior logs. 60% reduction in cortisol compared to your readings in Amarillo, Rowan said. "No aggression for 4 weeks. That's not a miracle, Mr. Whitmore. That's environment." Holden's face changed as he read, confusion giving way to something almost like shame. "All that time," he murmured, "we thought we were fixing him. Turns out we were breaking him." Nessa opened her laptop and showed him the video she'd been recording. Nabid mapping the land, resting by the trees, walking alongside the smaller cattle without incident. Holden watched in silence. When the clip ended, he looked up. "We built our facility for efficiency, not for life. He's proof we've been doing it wrong." The bull took a slow breath and lowered his head to graze again, calm and steady. Holden stared a long while, then turned to Silas. "If you're willing," he said softly, "I'd like to make this his home." Silas folded his arms. "Home's not a place you're given," he said. "It's the one you find when no one's trying to change you." And out in the pasture, Nabid kept grazing, as if he'd already known that truth long before any of them did. By the next week, the arrangement had turned into something larger than Silas ever imagined. Holden stayed in Talkeetna for 3 days, signing papers, taking notes, asking quiet questions. He wasn't the same man who'd stepped out of that truck. Something in his eyes had softened. "I'll cover feed costs, fencing, veterinary care, everything," he told Silas one morning. "You shouldn't pay to clean up our mistake." Silas shook his head. "You're not cleaning up a mistake anymore," he said. "You're keeping a promise to an animal that survived you." Holden didn't argue. Instead, he walked to the fence line and stood there for a long time, watching Nabid move through the pasture like a ghost of snow and breath. In the evenings, Nessa worked on her report for the university, writing late into the night. She titled it "Behavioral Recovery in High-Intelligence Cattle, the Nabid Case." "He's teaching me more about patience than any lecture ever could," she told her father. "He doesn't just live here, he's living for the first time." A week later, Rowan returned with her scanner and camera, collecting data. "His heart rate is steady, hormone levels still low," she said. "If this continues, his body will repair itself completely within months." Buck, leaning against the fence, grinned. "Guess he likes Alaskan air." Rowan smiled back. Guess he likes freedom? When the journalist from Alaska magazine arrived, Silas nearly turned him away. But Holden insisted, let them tell the story right. The reporter spent 2 days observing, asking questions about the bull, the mistake, the change. He stood beside Silas as the sun bled orange over the mountains and said, so what's it like, caring for a creature everyone else wanted gone? Silas thought for a long moment before answering. It's humbling, he said. He's not dangerous. He just needed space to remember who he was. That night, as the wind rustled the dry grass, Nabid stood near the spruce grove, staring toward Denali's silver peaks. Nessa filmed quietly, her breath visible in the cold. You know what's strange, Dad? She whispered. He never tries to leave. Silas nodded. Maybe that's because for the first time, he's got something worth staying for. Holden joined them, his voice low. Sometimes, he said, a mistake's just the world finding its balance again. The three of them watched the bull, calm, whole, and unchained, and for a moment the silence between them felt like understanding. Spring crept in slowly, melting the snow into long streams that carved through the pasture. Grass pushed through in patches of green, and the air carried the smell of wet earth and pine. Nabid's coat had thickened through winter, now shining under the early sun. He moved easily, heavier but calmer, grazing alongside Silas's 3 beef cattle as if he had always belonged to them. 6 months had passed since the day that wrong truck stopped at Silas's gate. What began as a problem to solve had become the center of every day. The sanctuary in Anchorage had reopened weeks ago, but nobody mentioned sending Nabid there anymore. He was home now and everyone knew it. Nessa's university research had grown into a full project funded by Holden's company. She presented her findings to her professors: environmental enrichment and behavioral rehabilitation in high-intelligence livestock. The footage showed Nabid walking his chosen routes, resting under the same tree each evening, and greeting Silas with a quiet snort whenever he brought hay. Her classmates called it extraordinary. Her professor called it historic. Holden came back in May with a small film crew from the Agricultural Board. They want to record him for an educational piece, he explained. His story's already changing how we design our facilities. Silas nodded, though part of him didn't like the cameras. Just make sure they see him as he is, he said. Not a symbol. Not a product. Just himself. Rowan visited again too, shaking her head in quiet amazement. He's gained 200 pounds of healthy weight. Stress hormones 65% below his Texas levels. No aggression in 6 months. She ran her hand along the fence post. You realize he's rewriting the books on animal behavior, right? Silas smiled faintly. He's just living the way he should have from the start. That evening the three of them, Silas, Nessa, and Holden, stood near the edge of the field. The sky burned orange behind Denali, and Nabid was a pale silhouette against the glow. You ever think, Holden said, how 2 numbers switched in an address could change the whole way we think about life? Silas chuckled. Sometimes the world fixes our mistakes by making bigger ones. Nessa lifted her camera one last time and filmed the bull turning his head toward them, quiet and steady. The mountains glowed like old glass behind him. And in that stillness they all felt it, the truth that had been building since the beginning, that freedom, even found by accident, can heal what years of control could not. Moral lesson. Sometimes what looks like a mistake is mercy in disguise. When we stop forcing living beings into our idea of order, we discover theirs, and that's where peace begins.